you want to, from wherever you are, you're welcome to sing along if you catch on, if you know it. All day, staring at the ceiling, making friends with shadows on my wall. And all night, hearing voices telling me that I should get some sleep, because tomorrow might be good for something. Hold on, feeling like I'm headed for a breakdown, and I don't know why. I'm not crazy, I'm just a little unwell. I know right now you can't tell, but stay a while and maybe then you'll see a different side of me. I'm not crazy, I'm just a little impaired. I know that right now you don't care, but soon enough you're gonna think of me and how I used to be. Me, talking to myself in public and dodging glances on the train. And I know they've all been talking about me, and I can hear them whisper, and it makes me think there must be something wrong with me. Out of all the hours thinking that somehow I've lost my mind, but I'm not crazy, I'm just a little unwell. I know right now you can't tell, but stay a while and maybe then you'll see a different side of me. I'm not crazy, I'm just a little impaired, and I know that right now you don't care, but soon enough you're gonna think of me and how I used to be. I've been talking in my sleep, pretty soon they'll come to get me. Yeah, they're taking me away. I'm not crazy, I'm just a little unwell. I know that right now you can't tell, but stay a while and maybe then you'll see a different side of me. I'm not crazy, I'm just a little impaired. I know that right now you don't care, but soon enough you're gonna think of me and how I used to be. How I used to be. And how I used to be. Yeah. I'm not crazy, I'm just a little unwell. Yeah. Stay a while and maybe then you'll see a different side of me.
I'm not crazy, I'm just a little unwell. I know right now you can't tell, but stay a while, maybe then you'll see a different side of me. That song by Matchbox 20 resonated with a generation. My generation. I was a college student when that was released, and this song, well, like many hit songs do, it put words and music to what we were feeling. And it did so in a way that normalized and validated the experience. I mean, we latched onto those lyrics and sang them with passion and commitment, claiming without 1 ounce of shame that, well, we weren't crazy, just a little unwell. And not just a few of us, lots of us. So many, in fact, that song was nominated for a Grammy. It was at the top of the Billboard charts. It was an international hit, all the way to places like Australia and New Zealand. And the song spells out what kinds of behaviors we thought made us just a little unwell. Staring at the ceiling all day. Well, we might call that depression. Hearing voices all night telling me to get some sleep. That's insomnia. That could go with all sorts of things like anxiety and depression, psychosis, feeling like a breakdown without knowing why. talking to myself in public, thinking maybe I've lost my mind. I don't know, could be bipolar disorder. Pretty soon they'll come to get me. With those symptoms, well, pretty soon somebody might be coming to get us some help. Or feeling like they're coming to get us could be another symptom, like the paranoia of schizophrenia. Now, I'm not a doctor or a counselor or any sort of mental health professional. I've got no business diagnosing anything. But I come from the generation of this song, and I'm a witness to the generation that came after mine that seems to struggle even more than we did. 42% of Gen Z, those born between like the late 90s to early 2010s, have been diagnosed with a mental health condition. Diagnosed. That's not just having a day staring at walls. That's being unwell enough, long enough, and having courage enough to make the appointment, get the diagnosis, and the help. And it's not just them. Dr. Henry Cloud is a Christ follower who is a clinical psychologist and a New York Times bestselling author. He says that pre-pandemic, 15 to 17% of our country's population had diagnosable mental health struggles. In the last few years, that has risen to over 40% of Americans. 40%. That means if you are sitting in a row of 5 people right now, 2 of you are struggling. And even if you're one of the 3 who isn't, with the numbers that high, you know someone who is, who's a little or maybe a lot unwell. They're not fine. And as we've been looking at for the last few weeks, everything's not fine. So today we are wrapping up this series with a conversation about mental health from a faith perspective. Now, mental health struggles have always been part of the human experience, but we haven't often done a good job talking about them or understanding them. That's true of humanity at large, but also of those of us who believe in God and follow Jesus. We often don't know how our faith should inform our response, and that's what we're going to talk about today. But one last note before we dive in. If you're very familiar with this, you can take a deep breath. I am not building to a moment when I will say that if you just believe in Jesus enough, if you live righteously enough, if you pray faithfully enough, that it will be okay and God will heal you. He might, he certainly can. But just like with all kinds of struggles, our world is not as God intended for it to be. It's broken. We're broken. And sometimes God intervenes in ways that heal and restore, and sometimes he doesn't. But God is with us. He is at work around us, and he has guidance for how to live in a world where everything's not fine. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to start by praying to him. Would you pray with me? God, we trust that you are with us right now. God, for some of us, this topic hits really close to home. And we pray that you would bring peace and comfort right now. God, for others, this topic feels so separate from life experience. We don't really know what to do with it. So God, we pray that you would give us openness right now. Wherever we are, give us ears to hear from you, to hear what you would have each of us hear today. It's in your name that we pray. Amen. Okay, let's start in the beginning. When the earth was formless and empty, darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. At the beginning of creation, God looked at the world and saw that it was empty and dark, and he responded to that darkness by inserting light into it. But then humanity took our world that God created and we distorted it. Over and over again, every human in history has contributed to the brokenness of our world. But no matter how badly we have messed things up, God has never stopped giving humanity another chance. But eventually, at one point, God looked at the darkness of the world again and decided it needed light again, like it did in the beginning. So he sent Jesus to earth as a human. And in him was life. And that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Now, this is Jesus. Obviously, we're not Jesus. We're not the light of all mankind. And we're not capable of speaking light into existence like God the Father did. But God's light is in us if we follow him. And we can carry it with us into the dark places of our own minds and into the darkness that others are in. See, to live as followers of Jesus in a world where everything's not fine, we need to enter the darkness and be a light. Enter the darkness. Some of you know the darkness all too well. It can come in seasons like postpartum and menopause. It can come with diagnoses like depression and bipolar and others. It can sound like these words from the writer of Psalm 88 to God. I am overwhelmed with troubles, and my life draws near to death. I am counted among those who go down to the pit. I'm like one without strength. I am set apart with the dead, like the slain who lie in the grave, whom you remember no more, who are cut off from your care. You have put me in the lowest pit, in the darkest depths. Your wrath lies heavily on me. You have overwhelmed me with all your waves. This writer describes feeling overwhelmed with trouble, near death, without strength, cut off from God's memory and care, deeply covered in God's wrath. This is a place of darkness, and it's a place of loneliness. These are the next words. You have taken from me my closest friends and have made me repulsive to them. And then he goes on to say, you have taken from me friend and neighbor. Darkness is my closest friend. See, when darkness surrounds, it also separates. And friends and neighbors and family members sometimes move away from the darkness. And sometimes the darkness, it pushes them away, even though they want to get close. The people I know who struggle with acute or chronic mental illness, some of the loneliest, most isolated people I know. And the people who love people with acute or chronic mental illness are often lonely and isolated too, because it's just so hard and overwhelming. And though we're better at talking about it today than we've been before, there's still stigma and so much misunderstanding. Like there's so much I don't know about mental health, about what to say and do and what not to say and do. So it's tempting just to say and do nothing. But God shows us that when there's darkness, he moves toward it. He finds a way to bring light. He creates it. He sends Jesus to embody it. And Jesus might no longer be walking on this earth as a human, but we are. And when we see someone succumbing to the darkness, we can show up and reflect the light of Jesus. I recently heard from a man at our church who has PTSD. He returned from war broken and in the dark. And he told me it hurt. It was painful to come to church because he just felt like he wasn't deserving of God's love or his grace. So he just stopped coming altogether. That made things worse, of course. It led to more darkness, arrogance and anger and fear and sadness until he lost his family. And he almost lost his life. And he wrote me and told me about it. And he said it was at that point, he says, I broke. And that is when God came to me. He put the right people in the right place at the right times to help me take one more step. One more step towards him. One more step towards life. One more step towards community. The counter to trauma is connection. And God put these people in my path and made me part of community again. God met him in the depths of his darkness and his brokenness when darkness was his closest friend. And how did God meet him there? Well, he gave him new friends, ordinary people like you and me, people who were open to God's leading in their lives, who allowed God to lead them to enter the darkness and to be the light. Who do you see around you that's in darkness? Could God maybe be calling you to enter that darkness and be a light? On a few occasions, I feel like God's asked me to do just that. There are some people in our church and in my life who occasionally find themselves in darkness. And sometimes they invite me into it. And I'll be honest, sometimes it's scary to go. That's one of the fears that's almost universal, right? Being afraid of the dark. Because when we're in the dark, everything is amplified. Every sound is scarier than usual. And of course, we're afraid of what can we not see? What or who is around us that we don't even know is there? This time last year, my fear of the dark and my fear of heights collided. My family got to go to the Grand Canyon on my sabbatical trip. Now, we crammed lots of spots and sites into the trip, but the Grand Canyon was the main attraction, the anchor of the trip, so we gave it ample time. I mean, I suppose you could just go there for a couple of hours if you wanted to, but we opted for a longer experience. So we arrived one day and had our breath taken away by the immensity of the canyon that we only ever saw a small portion of. We stayed overnight in a lodge in the park. We went to bed kind of early that night. We watched an epic Final Four basketball game, and then we set our alarms for an obscenely early time on vacation. And when that alarm went off, I rolled out of bed and I literally put on every item of clothing I had with me. 2 pairs of leggings, sweatpants, shirts, hoodies, double layers of socks. And we set out in the dark for the rim of the Grand Canyon. Now, as we walked along the paths, there were some lights. But as we approached the canyon itself, there was just darkness and our little flashlights. The only thing scarier than standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon in the light of day and seeing how close you are to falling to your death is approaching the canyon in the dark of night and not seeing how close you are. Because by the time you're close enough to see it, it's too late. But we were careful and we staked out a couple of spots to sit. The guys were together and a little closer to the edge. The girls were together and we huddled up to stay warm. There's Lily and me. We opted to wear our mask because they put our warm breath back on our face and helped us. And we sat there in the darkness. And then on a Sunday morning, on the other side of the country, we had a powerful experience with the creator of the world. While you all were gathered right here for worship. And we watched as the darkness took shape. And then as it got deeper and more detailed. And with every minute that went by and every bit the sun climbed higher, we could see more of the beauty of this natural wonder. My son later said, "I don't know how anybody could watch the sun rise at the Grand Canyon and not pray." He's right. It was a holy moment. See, when we move through our fear and we enter the darkness, sometimes we get to have holy moments. The first time I visited someone who was hospitalized with mental illness, I was afraid. I mean, if you've never done this, like you put your phone and all your other personal belongings in a locker, then you have to enter through a series of protected doors. That has a way of making you feel a little unsettled. Or sitting with someone who's experiencing paranoia, who thinks the people in the next booth have been sent to eavesdrop on us, who thinks someone is sending messages through the TV who isn't even sure that I'm me. Well, that's unsettling. Hearing someone tell you their plan to end their life, the purchases they've made, the decisions they've made, that's awful. But imagine being the one who hears the voices and doesn't know if they're good or evil. Imagine being the one who has the suicidal ideations in their brain. Imagine being the one who's coming down from feeling like they were king or queen of the world and finding out they've left a path of destruction in their wake. They've spent all their money, quit their job, said awful things to their friends and family, broken the law. Imagine how unsettling that is. Of course, some of you don't have to imagine. You know. Or imagine how hard it is to be the mom or the dad, the husband or the wife, the son or the daughter of someone who doesn't know what's real or not, if you're real or not. Someone who says horrible things to you that they would never dare utter if they could help it. Someone who thinks often about not being around anymore. Imagine how unsettling that is. And again, some of you don't have to imagine. You know. You know the darkness. And we also know the God who makes light in the darkness, who shows up in it. And he sends us out as his ambassadors of light. See, Jesus says to his followers, you are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Jesus deploys us to be the light of the world. See, we don't know Jesus so that we can have this little hidden light that's just for us. No, Jesus came into this world as the light of the world to deploy us, to stand up, to boldly march into the darkest places, to shine his light to everyone, especially those who are in the deepest darkness, because they're the ones who need it the most. Yes, going into the darkness can be scary, but getting to reflect the light of the world to people at their most broken and fragile, oh, that's a sacred gift. And Jesus offers it to us. Now, there are lots of ways to do this, lots of ways to shine that light. Got just one example from a letter to the church in Thessalonica. Therefore, encourage one another and build each other up, just as in fact you are doing. And we urge you, brothers and sisters, warn those who are idle and disruptive, encourage the disheartened, help the weak, be patient with everyone. We can be light by encouraging and building up as much as possible and as is honest. I'm not arguing we should say everything is fine when it's not. That's kind of the point of this whole series. And we shouldn't look at poor decisions or illnesses and say that they're good. That would be dishonest. But we can look for ways to encourage and build up, especially those who are weak, disheartened, and may require extra amounts of patience. I try to do this when I'm working with someone who struggles with mental health. I affirm everything that I possibly can. Like there's one person who I visit with periodically. She works so hard to be healthy. She goes to recovery groups, medical doctors, a psychiatrist. She meets with me. She meets with other faith leaders. She has plans written in place with her family so they know when and how to intervene when she gets unwell. See, this woman and I, well, we're similar. We're about the same age, both married, both have a couple of kids, both love Jesus and pursue relationships with God. And she has to make dozens of decisions every day to be at a level of health that I get to enjoy naturally with no effort. It's not fair. I'm no more deserving of mental health than she is, so I try to build her up every way that I can. I have another friend for whom, well, daily decisions, they can be catastrophic. I mean, like, if I choose to stay up too late and eat bad food, I'll pay for it the next day by being tired and lethargic. But him, if he stays up too late and eats and drinks the wrong things, then his brain can go into a heightened state that wreaks havoc on him and everyone around him. It's not fair. His life is harder than mine, and he doesn't deserve that. So I try to build him up every way that I can. Let's enter the darkness and be a light. And let's take some tools with us. Just like my family approached the Grand Canyon in the dark with flashlights and layers of clothing, we need to approach mental health struggles with some tools, namely boundaries and resources. While we should enter the darkness, we should not put ourselves in positions to be overtaken by it. If that happens, we're no good to anybody. If you do life with someone who struggles with mental health, you probably know this already. You have to take care of yourself if you're going to be able to take care of anyone else. And if you are one who struggles, then you can choose to set good boundaries when you're well for when you're not. Because when you're not well, you're often not capable of setting, sometimes of even following the boundaries. And every relationship needs boundaries to be healthy. We always need to know like where we end and another person begins. That's true in, well, marriages, for example. Today is my 18th wedding anniversary, and if my husband were here right now, he would tell you there are some boundaries I still have a hard time following. Namely, I take up too much space. This is ironic because my husband is literally twice my size and takes up twice as much space as I do until we get to our room, that is. Now, I'm sure no one is surprised that even though my clothes are a fraction of the size of his, I dominate the closet and dresser space. That's pretty typical, I think. The surprise, though, is how much space I take up in the bed. Now, if you saw us, you might imagine, man, he probably has to sleep corner to corner, and Angie's probably like crammed into this little small space, getting as small as she can. If you would assume that, you would be wrong. Most mornings I wake up squarely in the middle of the bed, and he is scrunched up into as small a space as possible. And if he were here, he would tell you the worst part of all of that is how much heat I radiate. It's true, I've always been this way. I'm like a human incubator. We have no need for flannel sheets, forget electric blankets. We need the summer weight sheets and the fan going year round. For the record, this is why the babies like me, because when I hold them, it's like being swaddled in a warm blanket. My husband, however, is over it. 18 years later, he would appreciate it if I would figure out how to stay in my space and take up less of it. When we're dealing with mental health, we must figure out how to define the space. We have to know where the lines are and how to make sure everybody's taking up the proper amount of space. Because some families or friends, well, they define the space so that the person who is unwell takes up all of it. It is all theirs for the taking, especially when they're not well, and everybody else just has to work around them. It's all grace all the time. There's no space for accountability or honest conversation about relationships. And then there's other families and friends. Well, they define the space so that the person who is unwell is pushed aside or controlled so much, they're not given any space to really relate to others. They're the identified patient, and there's almost constant conversation about their brokenness and very little grace for it. Now, those are just two possible scenarios. The combinations are really endless. And the truth is, I don't know. I don't know where the line should be drawn in your situation, just that they should be drawn. And there are professionals and support groups who can help you figure out where to draw the lines. I encourage you to take advantage of those resources because everyone needs boundaries, especially when they're dealing with tough situations. Even Jesus, when he was on earth, he was busy. He was traveling and speaking and healing people. He was being disrespected. He was dealing with really hard things like the death of a friend, the death of a child. And when he was in a hard spot, he tried to gather his friends and hear how they're doing. And the Bible says, but then because so many people were coming and going, they didn't even have a chance to eat. So he said to them, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. And Jesus recognized that he and his disciples, they needed some time away for quiet, for rest. But this didn't exactly work out. People followed them. So people, when they followed Jesus, responded to them with compassion, and he met their most immediate need. But then, immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. And after leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. Jesus made his disciples get away and get some space. He nicely made the crowd go away. He dismissed them is a nice way of saying that. And then Jesus went away all by himself and got the quiet and the rest that he needed. Jesus defined the space when he would care for other people. He also defined when it was time for them to leave. And he defined the space that he needed for himself. This is key for living out our faith in a world that's broken with mental illness. If we're going to do life with people who are sometimes unwell, and I think we should, because as I said, that's often a lonely and isolating experience. But if we're going to go there, and if we're going to have a light to shine, then we have to do this work of defining the space and setting the boundaries. Because we're all living our lives kind of like Jesus did. We're busy doing important work. Each of us is facing challenges of our own. So sometimes we need to make plans to get some space, to get away. And what I find helpful about the story we just looked at is, hey, it acknowledges sometimes those plans get interrupted. Sometimes we have to push pause and meet an immediate pressing need. But once we've done that, the immediate pressing need becomes taking care of ourselves. Jesus models that for us, and he's God. If he found that helpful, who are we to say we don't need it? We all need rest and space. We all need Jesus, every single one of us. From the ones of us who are just a little unwell, to those who are a whole lot unwell, to the people who love someone who's unwell. None of us is fine. It's not fine. Everything's not fine. And we can come to Jesus with all of that. So as we end this service, end this series, let's turn to Jesus. Not because he's going to make everything fine, but because he's our hope. He's our stay when we're not okay.
Lord, I come, I confess, bowing here, I find my rest. And without you, I fall apart. You're the one that guides my heart. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. You guys can sing this to him. Your heart. Where it runs deep, your grace is more. Where grace is found is where you are. And where you are, Lord, I am free. Your holiness is Christ in me. Where you are, Lord, I am free. Holiness is Christ in me. Yeah. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. So teach my song to rise to you. When temptation comes my way, and when I cannot stand, I'll fall on you. 'Cause Jesus, you're my hope and stay. And when I cannot stand, I'll fall on you. 'Cause Jesus, you're my hope and stay. Yeah. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you.
We need Jesus, every one of us, every hour of our lives, but especially when we or someone we know is struggling. When that happens, let's enter the darkness, be a light, and define the space. And if you would like help with anything that we've talked about in this series, I would love to hear from you. You can reach me by email at mark.tapscott@pccwired.net. Thanks for spending some time with us today, and we'll see you next week as we head into our Easter series. Take care.